When brews go completely wrong. Hey guys, Mulligan here, and today I wanted to discuss Icaria Gold and my experiences playing the deck. I want to preface this by saying that I will be talking about a different take on the more popular Icaria Gold deck, that take being with an Armory package. Also, if this is your first time listening to this series, this is not a deck tech. This is more of a discussion piece on what I've learned brewing and testing this style of deck. I won't be going through every card in the deck this time around because, as you'll see, there aren't any cards that stand out in particular for this type of list. In fact, let me go ahead and go over to the deck list right now. So as you can see, it's basically just a pile of most of the good cards you can play in the Fire, Time, and Justice factions. I will still touch on the cards I've used in previous versions of this deck as well, but there's only a few. Most of the tweaks I've made to this list have been on how many copies of a card I should be running. Let's go through a little history first, though. I first built this deck when the Vara's Journey promos came out, so before Jex Bounty was released. My theory with the deck was to splash Time to give Armory the best power and influence fixing possible with cards like Find the Way, and access to a better early game and mid game with cards like Desert Marshal and Seraph. And even the Great Parliament to an extent, actually. The first thing some might notice is the lack of Sandstorm Titan, but we will get to that later on. I honestly felt that despite not having access to Smuggler Stash, the Combray cards were enough to make up the difference between Marshall being more flexible and easier to cast than Valkyrie Enforcer, at least in my experience, and Seraph providing another late game option with her ability in addition to her being an excellent early game blocker. However, I was testing other decks at the time and put this one on the shelf, which I think was a big mistake because in my opinion this deck probably would have been at its best during that time frame because we had cards like Find the Way, but traditional Armory decks did not have access to Quarry or Copperhall Bailiff yet. Once Jex Bounty came out, though, after stubbornly trying to make this work since then, I've realized the hard way that there is no reason to play this style of deck over traditional Armory. The biggest problem with this deck, after thinking things over, I feel is just the lack of identity. I attempted to make this a good stuff style Armory deck, taking some of the best cards that Time has to offer and combining them with the traditional Armory package. And this made the list extremely tight. It was very hard to cut cards in order to fit in others. A lot of the time, I ended up using some cards that are widely considered to be staple 4-ofs as 3-ofs, like Torch and Desert Marshal. And I struggled to really pin down how I should be playing this deck. Initially, I tried playing it as a control deck, only using weapons when needed to clear threats. During that process, I learned the hard way that Sword of Icaria is a proactive card in every matchup except the aggressive ones like Stone Scar Burn and Rakano Plate. My win rate suffered a ton when I tried to play it like a control deck, trying to go as late as possible. But after tweaking the deck to what you see now, I started playing against matchups better, but the deck, it just hasn't held up at all. I've probably lost to every single archetype in this game with this deck. Big Combray, Stone Scar Midrange, Shimmer Pack, Rakano Rally, Found Reanimator decks, both Haunting Scream and otherwise. The TJP Voltron style aggro decks that are similar to Rakano Plate itself, Elysian Midrange, Stone Scar Callus, Combray Aggro, Stone Scar Burn, Icaria Blue, Clockroaches, TJP Midrange, Found Aggro, Nick Detraction decks, Skycrag decks, Mono Fire decks, those Copper Conduit combo decks with Safe Return, and even Stone Scar decks packing Brimstone, Altar, and Whispers in the Void. But the one thing I am proud of in this deck is the power base. The first one I had was god-awful. I couldn't play anything when I needed to, let alone Icaria. I went back to the drawing board and reviewed the Frank Karsten theory again and rebuilt the power base to what you see now. And with 27 power, 4 Seek power, and 2 Find the Way, this thing ran like butter. You dirtled sometimes, but that happens with traditional Armory and other control decks as well. And then outside of that, I had no issue playing things when I needed to. I was able to play Icaria at least 80% of the time when she was in hand, and honestly I think I'm downplaying it because it felt like 90 to 95% of the time when I played this deck. I basically only experienced Power Screw once every 20 games based on the stats I keep track of, which is insane. If you are going to play this, I would not mess with the power base. One final thing that I've also learned is that with the current core set of cards, I don't think there's a way you can make this style of deck where time is the splash color. I think time demands that it be a primary color when you've got stuff like Sandstorm Titan and even most of the cards in the Elysian midrange shell requiring double time influence to play them. I think something like Toth's Icaria Gold has been more successful because fire is actually the splash color, and the deck leans far more toward the big Combre style deck with a Rise to the Challenge toolbox package. Finally, I want to talk about the very short list of cards I've tried in the past that are no longer in this deck. The first being Sandstorm Titan. I had these in when I initially built the deck. Great card. No one would argue that. But after testing for some time, I found that I would get into awkward board states where Icaria would normally win the game for me, but I needed her to be able to actually fly to do so, and that Titan I had on board prevented me from doing that. It just promoted too many board stalls, which you would like, but it doesn't work in all decks. So I finally ended up cutting them for the Great Parliament, being amazing after Harsh Rule while not eating a buff from something like Inspire or Sword of Icaria. Another thing that happened a lot with Sandstorm Titan. The other card that was in here that is no longer in this list is Sword of the Sky King. I've always thrown this card in as an automatic one-of whenever I played any deck using Icaria, without much thought other than another flexible late game removal card that doubles as a bomb. What ultimately led me to cut this card was that it would compete with Seraph. I had so many situations where I was careful enough with a copy of Seraph in hand to where she lived to use her ability, and I had to decide between using it or playing Sword of the Sky King. And surprisingly, Sword of the Sky King was the less appealing option more often than not. I always thought that this card was good, not just because it's removal that doubles as a bomb, but it also represents massive life gain. The reality though is that I would often play it into 2 threats on the opposing board, so that massive life gain would get cut in half immediately anyway, and my opponent would do something to break the sword, like use removal on the one unit I had protecting it, or use burn to the face, etc, etc. So I finally gave up on it, since I also felt I needed to lower my curve anyway. It's been a very frustrating time with this brew, and it really sucks because, I mean, look at this deck. You can't definitively say that there's a card in here that's bad. And I mean bad in the sense that every card in this list is used in at least one other deck in the current metagame, regardless of the tier it's in. And while this list looks good, however, just because you can pile a bunch of good cards together doesn't mean it will be a good deck. If anyone can get this style of deck to work, that's got the time, then more power to you. Honestly, I feel like I took an established archetype in Armory and diluted it too much. I think if you play these colors together, you should just play normal Icaria Gold. Whatever list Toth is playing has always been good. Though in this current meta, where Chalice decks have been making noise, I'm not sure how much Icaria Gold is holding up. But that's all that I have for you guys today. For those that made it to the end, thank you so much for listening to my thoughts on this deck. I tried to make this one shorter for you guys, but if there's anything you thought I missed or you want to continue the discussion in general, please leave comments in the comment section below. And feel free to like this video if you liked it. Feel free to leave a dislike if you didn't. Feedback is also appreciated as well. Let me know if there's anything I can improve on for this particular series or in general. And again, thanks for taking time out of your day to watch this, and I'll see you all soon. Take care.